July 1st, 1982, 20 years to the day since Medicare was launched here at the Saskatchewan Legislature in Regina. It's getting increasingly difficult to find many Canadians who can even remember paying the doctor without Medicare. It's almost impossible to find anyone against Medicare.
I think we should keep the system that we have now. I don't think that many segments of the population would be getting adequate medical care. We just couldn't afford to pay for it.
Paying doctors directly, sometimes maybe you may not have the money at the time when you need doctors' attendance. So I think it's a very good program.
I think that one of the nicest things that ever happened to Saskatchewan, and Saskatchewan was the very first province to have it, was Medicare, and I hope it stays.
Canada's national Medicare program had a stormy birth in Saskatchewan. The attention of the world was focused on this sparsely populated province of the Canadian Prairie in the summer of 1962. But unique innovations in medical care delivery have always been part of the Saskatchewan experience. Since its formation as a province in 1905, Saskatchewan has welcomed wave upon wave of immigrants, lured to the last frontier by energetic colonization campaigns. The settlers came to escape the class-ridden peasant societies of Western Europe and industrial England. In Saskatchewan, they found a new feudalism of despotic railroad companies and grain cartels. Co-ops and wheat pools became their response. The true ideology of early Western Canada was survival in an inhospitable environment. Life on the far-flung homesteads of the Canadian prairie was dangerous, far from neighbors, far from medical care. The twin necessities of self-reliance and mutual aid became the character traits of all pioneers, regardless of status or origin. For the settlers, sheer survival demanded emergency care to protect life and limb. Women who bore the brunt of child-rearing anyway assumed their traditional role as healer.
Throughout the history of Saskatchewan, the people worked out techniques to provide themselves with health care when governments are incapable or unwilling to do so. The women of Saskatchewan were the ones who became terribly concerned before the First World War about tuberculosis, which, as you know, is taking a heavy drain of our population. And they organized the Anti-Tuberculosis League. They built 3 sanatoria. Imagine. Free care. It was the first free care in the hospital province's history of people suffering from tuberculosis.
I was called out to delivery. They used to send the father out carrying in water, you know, boil everything. And so I phoned for Mrs. Bray and asked her to come, that I'd have to put forceps on, and I got my chloroform and everything ready. So we were in the bedroom, and we laid crossways across the bed, and her legs were tied up, and Mrs. Bray was dripping the chloroform at one end, and I had the forceps at the other. And when this expectant father dashed into the room, and, "Hell, you ain't going to put them irons on my wife, you get the hell," and I pushed him off, you know, shoved him off, and was trying to get things, you know, it's quite a difficult procedure. Here, back he comes again. So finally I looked up at her and I said, "Mrs. Bray, we got to put him out." She says, "You said it, doctor." And she grabbed the chloroform mask over his face. He was leaning right over, you know me. She put the chloroform mask over his face, and he passed out. She anesthetized him, so she rolled him under the bed, and we delivered the baby.
As early as 1914, farmers in remote areas levied a charge to each other in order to guarantee an annual retainer for a doctor to live and work among them. These municipal doctors became the norm for providing medical care to the homesteaders, especially during the Great Depression.
There was no specialist. I took out appendixes and fixed hernias and took out gallbladders. You had to do it. You did it or it didn't get done. We had a lot of infections, pneumonia, lead poisonings, and I delivered a lot of babies. Women had babies in those days. Well, poverty was all over the world. It wasn't just in Canada. And I think they could have survived the poverty, but it was the failure of everything to grow, you know, an inability to grow things. In the spring, the farmers would seed their gardens and they'd seed their crops, and the hot, dry winds would come along and blow it all out and cover it over, and it would never sprout, it would never grow. And the grass fields where the cattle grazed, the grass would die. I'll never forget the dust storms. They were terrible. Your clothes and your face and your hands and everything would be black with dust when you got to the farm. You'd get inside and out of the wind, and the little houses that they lived in were often cold and poorly ventilated and dusty. The dust would blow in through the windows. Just like a dust bowl, to think you were in the Sahara Desert. We lived an awful lot on what the farmers brought us when I came here, but at Marquis, the farmers didn't have anything to bring. You know, they couldn't grow anything there themselves.
The Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, the CCF, the forerunner of the New Democratic Party of Canada, was formed in Saskatchewan in 1933 by a desperate coalition of farmers, co-op groups, and socialists responding to the Depression in the Dirty 30s. One of the major planks of the original CCF platform was free health care for all.
The doctor was a friend of the family. This was his community. He settled in that community and was probably going to be there the rest of his or her life. And there was a relationship. He was your doctor, you know. He talked about our doctor. After the war, doctors began to concentrate in cities. It was hard to get doctors in small towns and villages. Doctors went into the cities and said, if you want us, come to the city and we'll be here. And so there was an impersonality relationship between the doctors and the patients. You were patient number so-and-so. You're no longer Joe Bloke from the southeast quarter section in the township. That personal relationship was gone. And because of that, a totally different attitude. You could be treated as a customer. You represented a certain amount of money at the end of the month or the end of the year, rather than as one of my neighbors who needs some help and we'll worry about the money later on. So the whole relationship changed, as it has for many other professions.
Since the election of the CCF government of Tommy Douglas in 1944, some form of Medicare was inevitable for Saskatchewan. By 1946, Saskatchewan had in place Canada's first insurance plan covering the cost of staying in hospital for all citizens of the province. Once the federal government finally agreed to share in health costs with the provinces in 1957, the Douglas government moved to cover doctor bills as well. They went to the people for a mandate in what became known as the Medicare election of 1960.
I think that medical care is so important that it ought not to have a price tag on it. I think that we have come to the place where medical care, like education, ought to be available to every citizen, irrespective of their financial state.
The 1960 election pitted the government's Medicare idealism against the medical establishment's fear that state medicine in Saskatchewan would be a beachhead for the rest of North America. The government won a strong majority. Thinking the issue had been settled, they set to work to organize the Medicare program so long in the planning. But what was the norm in over 40 other countries of the developed world was viewed with suspicion and alarm by the medical profession in the Cold War atmosphere of the time. Even Saskatchewan's own doctors, many of whom had been on relief with their patients during the Depression, changed their minds about the value of government's role in health care, once the post-war economic boom restored their financial security. In 1961, Tommy Douglas assumed the leadership of the new federal NDP, leaving Woodrow Lloyd as premier to persuade the province's angry doctors to accept the Medicare plan the people of Saskatchewan had voted for a year earlier.
The request is simply that you give the plan a fair trial, that you participate in its planning, thank you, gentlemen, and administration to the end that it may become a better plan for you and the people of the province.
However, the doctors were not convinced. Anti-government protests were organized, playing upon the fears of the people.
Our great concern is, with our doctor going, is that our boy with a chronic ailment, and we don't know when this is going to happen, and we just had our feeling of security knocked right out from underneath us as far as I'm concerned.
Did you know we had an open-heart surgeon in Regina, and now he's gone?
You know, the thing that worries me about this, I'm beginning to feel like a cornered rat. The people have requested a delay in this plan, and we've done everything we possibly can do. We can't do any more, and our doctors are leaving. What's going to happen after July the 1st?
Canadian Medicare was born in Saskatchewan on July 1st, 1962. Few Saskatchewan doctors attended the delivery. 90% of the province's 800 doctors closed their offices in protest. The doctors were on strike.
Today, the lines are firmly drawn. The government is putting Medicare to work, and the doctors are putting their emergency service into operation.
Negotiation has failed, and today it's come to a physical test of strength. The doctors have locked their office doors and say that from now on, they will treat only emergencies. I am Peter Churchill of News Magazine, and this is the emergency ward of Regina General.
In every country where a form of Medicare has been launched, it has been over the objections of the medical establishment.
This is like asking the doctors if they would like to try a hanging, and if they didn't like it, it could be undone.
Yeah, the feelings were running very, very high. And after all of us felt that our livelihood was at stake, and our our lifestyle was at stake, and we weren't sure whether we were going to be able to continue to practice in Saskatchewan, because according to the legislature, we either have to practice under their scheme or get out. So obviously our feelings were running very high. The population at large, their feelings began to run high as some of the doctors packed up and left, and others were threatening to leave, and they became very concerned that when the smoke of battle had cleared, that we would be left with very few doctors in Saskatchewan, and they'd be losing their own doctors.
We feel we cannot practice under state-controlled medicine. It seems to me the government has given us no choice but to leave.
By absencing myself doesn't say that I'm giving up the fight, but that I am promoting or extending the fight for professional freedom from elsewhere.
But there are doctors in the province who have dissenting signs in their office. One of them is Dr. O.K. Jertis of Prince Albert.
I simply could not refuse to see a patient who came to me that was ill, regardless of whether we're practicing under the Medical Care Act or any other way you look at it. If someone comes to me and is ill, then I certainly could not turn that patient down.
Well, this was very tense. I was appointed to the Medical Care Insurance Commission, really for want of anyone else to go on it. And the doctors then just got so that they would hardly talk to me. My own partners would hardly talk to me. The clinic was under real stress that last month or so as the boys put up signs saying this clinic will be closed on July the 1st, and I kept putting up my signs in the same building saying this office will be open here or someplace after July the 1st. So we got into a real tough stress situation.
With me in the studio here in Regina this afternoon is Saskatchewan's Premier, W.S. Lloyd, and a member of his cabinet, Alan Blakeney, the provincial treasurer. Premier Lloyd, what are you going to do, sir, if the doctors continue to refuse service?
Well, obviously there has to be a settlement in this one way or the other. I cannot bring myself to believe that doctors will continue to punish the people of the province in that way. We are making as much provision for bringing in doctors in an emergency and in a full-time basis as it's possible for us to do.
The government recruited doctors temporarily from Britain's National Health Service in order to reopen hospitals in the most dangerously undoctored areas.
I was working in a practice in Norwich, and I was eating my toast and marmalade at breakfast, and I read in the Daily Telegraph that English doctors were being recruited, so I rang up Saskatchewan House and said that I was interested in coming, and did they want me, and they warned me that I might expect unpleasantness, and they hoped that I realized that, and I said I did, and I'd come anyway, and in a couple of weeks I was on the plane. They gave me my ticket, and I was off.
How did you come to this decision as a result?
The best way I can summarize it was it's like being in a bad Western movie. There was a kind of furtive air about the whole thing. We were hustled into a car, taken off to an outlying motel, and given very stern instructions to absolutely stay there. But the College of Physicians had a very good espionage service, and they sent one of their English doctors. He was very agitated when he came. It was obviously not just a routine mission. He was very much involved in emotionally involved in delivering this message, and he said, I know you guys have come over with the best of intentions, but you don't understand the situation. The government is deceitful. You're getting into something you'll be sorry about. I beg you to go back.
No matter who you talked to, the emotions and the bitterness of the situation came through. I was invited to this party in a doctor's home. And the whole evening had been spent talking about nothing else, because you didn't, that whole 3.5 weeks, you didn't talk to anybody about anything else. And finally, he leaned towards me and he sort of waved his fist and he said, I can foresee the day when there will be barbed wire on the borders and jackboots in the streets, in this kind of intense voice. And I can remember still sort of standing, looking at him with a sort of stupid look on my face and saying, you don't really mean that. He said, I mean it, I mean it. I'm convinced this will happen. And he did.
Only a few days ago, in this very city, a woman tells me her doctor, whom I could name, told her, you know, you'll just be a number after the plan starts. And I won't be able to keep your secrets. I'll have to pass all the secrets you tell me on to the government. Now, this sort of propaganda, in my opinion, is an insult to the intelligence of the people of Saskatchewan.
There are 900,000 people in Saskatchewan, and they're also involved. They're rather angry and slightly frightened. They're caught in a quandary over the benefits of Medicare if it means the loss of their family doctor. This last week, the fight has generated a lot of emotional heat. The louder the shouting, the cloudier the issues. As the feelings rose, scare signs materialized. Racial slurs followed a government announcement that if local doctors wouldn't work under their program, foreign doctors would. Imports were caricatured by a hawk-like nose and an oriental pigtail.
While the government was officially in a dispute with the medical profession, the doctors' battle was being waged by the Keep Our Doctors movement. The KODs were a pro-free enterprise, anti-socialist, anti-government uprising, which owed as much to the traditions of rugged individualism found in farming communities as to any specific opposition to a tax-based medical insurance system. Covertly guided by the Saskatchewan College of Physicians and Surgeons and openly encouraged by opposition political parties, the KODs waged a fierce campaign characterized by extreme rhetoric.
This is the Regina Crusade. We are not here to cause difficulty or violence. We are here to express our inalienable democratic rights. We are here to say that this is a bad law.
There was an advertisement in the paper, names of the local members. Instructions were that if you disagreed with Medicare, you should phone these people. In the background of the call, there would be somebody gasping for breath, and the person on the phone would be saying, that's my child, and my child's going to die. And there'd be the most horrible noises, screaming and gasping for breath. Finally, we decided there was something wrong with these calls, and we had them checked out, and the calls were coming from a room in the local hotel. Obviously, it was a put-up job. The other kind of telephone call was when you received a call from an elderly person who had worked all his life, who would say quietly, "Stay with it. We should have Medicare. We should have had it 20 years ago. They've had it in other parts of the world, and it's successful. Don't back down an inch."
In response to the doctors' strike, the pro-Medicare forces developed community health clinics, staffed by many of the airlifted British doctors, as well as local doctors sympathetic to Medicare.
When we established Medicare, we knew that it was just an insurance system. And some of us wanted to make it more like a health service. And a small group of us met for months before Medicare came into effect to discuss how we could restructure healthcare services under the umbrella of health insurance.
About 40 community clinics were either operating or being planned by mid-July, providing concrete evidence to the medical leadership that the threat of alternative medical service was developing quickly along cooperative lines.
The negotiators for the government came to realize with the growth of the community clinic movement that there was a basis of support much stronger than they had recognized. And the medical profession also recognized that, so that as the government's position grew stronger, the medical profession's position grew weaker.
The effectiveness of the Keep Our Doctors movement peaked on July 11th in front of the legislature in Regina. Already near the end of the second week of the strike, the government showed no signs of relenting. The KODs called for a massive public demonstration to force a repeal of Medicare. While organizers bravely called the crowd 40,000, local police estimated less than 5,000. Afterwards, the momentum swung to the government. Perhaps fittingly, it took yet another British doctor to find the right prescription to finally end the dispute. Lord Stephen Taylor, a distinguished physician, is credited as one of the thinkers behind the British National Health Service. He came to Saskatchewan at Premier Lloyd's request and, inserting himself between the antagonists, managed to effect a settlement.
A few minutes ago, an agreement was signed between the government of Saskatchewan and the College of Physicians and Surgeons. It is written in very simple English so that every doctor and every citizen of the province can understand what it says.
On the signing of this agreement, the college will ask those of its members who have withdrawn their services to resume forthwith the normal practice of medicine.
The medical profession won some major concessions in the Saskatoon Agreement. Doctors retained the right to bill the patient directly and to opt out of the plan and still have their patients collect from the government. At the profession's insistence, the community clinics, which were popularizing the notion of a salaried medical service, were effectively crippled by the Saskatoon Agreement. Astonished and fearful at the hate unleashed within communities and families during the 23 days of the strike, the government was happy to have any agreement at all, as long as Medicare proceeded.
Well, I'm very happy about it, as I'm sure everyone is, and people that have families especially, I think are very happy about it because it's rather frightening to think that you can't get a doctor if something's wrong with your children.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm from Manitoba, and when I heard it was settled, I felt real good for the people of Saskatchewan.
Well, personally, I'm not too happy about it. I'm rather disappointed in the doctors. Myself, I'm a medical student, you see, and I hoped they'd fight it to the end, and I was kind of hoping the government backed down. Personally, being dead set against socialism.
Are you going to stay in Saskatchewan?
After I graduate, I intend to get out as fast as I can.
Once again, Saskatchewan led the way. After 1 year under Medicare, Saskatchewan had more doctors making more money than ever before. In spite of the compromises, the Saskatchewan Medicare plan became a major success, envied by other Canadians. In 1964, Saskatchewan Chief Justice Emmett Hall headed a royal commission which recommended a national Medicare system based on the Saskatchewan plan. By 1971, all provinces had joined. In 1980, Justice Hall was asked to review the state of Canada's healthcare system and concluded that Medicare remained Canada's most important and most popular social program.
The destruction of Medicare would not be tolerated, and any government that came forward with a proposition to discontinue it would be thrown out of office, as they should be. Because of all the services that have been developed, it has the greatest potential socially for all citizens.